You live from episode 25 of Life on the Rocks with your host Connor LaRocque. Today's featured guest in the hot seat is my good friend Darren Parker. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing just fine.
It's an absolute pleasure to have Darren on the show. We got an interesting episode set up for you guys today. For anyone who doesn't know Darren is a petroleum contractor with J.R. Hendry Contracting. But the reason I wanted to pull Darren on the show here, we're obviously going to talk about his entrepreneurial side, but you're actually doing a marathon. I want you to go in about this for a second, for what campaign it's for. It's kind of your own personal marathon tied in with a number of different things. Let's talk about that for a second.
Okay, yeah, I'm running my first marathon. I haven't run one before. So running the Scotiabank Toronto Waterfront Marathon in October 22nd.
Okay.
Reason I decided to run it, I've always liked running. I always wanted to run a marathon, and this is a good time for it.
Definitely.
The other reason, on a personal level, running is just a good way for me to stay positive with a good mental perspective, positive perspective. So when you're training, when you're running, when you're exercising, you're able to maintain just good, positive mental health, right?
Absolutely.
So then, another reason why I decided to run this thing is I was introduced to Cameron Helps and their Team Unbreakable run therapy programs. We had a run here in Sudbury. I went and did that run and was introduced to that and thought it was such a fantastic cause that I want to raise money on their behalf.
And so the team associated with Cameron Helps, that is the Unbreakable team, correct?
Yeah, Team Unbreakable.
Okay, so Team Unbreakable, we all actually spoke at that event. We had that set up. Josh Tilson is the young man, I call him an entrepreneur one day. He's going to be coming out, right? So there was almost 500 people in attendance.
There was.
So what inspired you about that? So just because when you start running, you get the endorphins pumping within your body, it makes you feel good. It's just a way, as kind of a release. Is that what got you started to help with mental health?
Very much so. I've come from a background where our family was impacted on a negative level in many ways, either through substance use or depression or suicide. I've lost many family members to suicide.
Sorry to hear that.
Back in 83, I lost a cousin. In 84, lost a brother. In 85, lost a cousin. In 86, my father. And in 84, I was also suicidal. So, it's not a fun thing by any means.
Definitely.
So if I'm talking about it now, I may seem light about it. At the time, it was probably the most devastating thing that I've ever encountered.
Can imagine.
Fortunately enough, was able to find a way to overcome my difficulties. So that was back 33 years ago, I think, when I was struggling with it myself. I have not had a suicidal thought since. I've not been gripped by substance use in other, similar ways that my other family members have been impacted, and just have been able to maintain positive mental perspectives and mental health. Running is a big part of it.
Definitely. I think that's huge. I want you to walk me through this for a minute. What were some of the things you would have done to get yourself out of that state? Because if you look at it, obviously you'd say mental health has everything to do with your state, right? If you're in a positive state, a negative state, your lazy state. Like, what were some of the things besides the running that were able to allow you to persevere out of that state, to kind of keep you maintained? Like you said, you haven't thought any of those negative kind of suicidal thoughts in quite some time. Like, what were some of the rituals or things you had done?
The thing that made the most impact is I came to a personal faith in God.
Wow.
So
yeah.
I had, prior to that, having faith was not that important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't really pay attention to it. Didn't grow up in that kind of an environment or whatever. But I came to a place of personal faith in Christ, and it dramatically changed me.
Wow.
So automatically, some of the thoughts that I had before, the harmful thoughts, had left almost. One day they're there, the next day they're gone. And then you start feeling a sense of self-worth. You start feeling a sense of value, and belonging, loved, that kind of thing. So it just kind of reset my foundation, put me on a good platform. And then for most of my adult years, when I first got married, because I got married pretty young actually, started having children at the age of 22, 23.
Oh, wow.
So the fact that you're becoming a dad scared the bejesus out of me, because I really had no background, worthwhile background, that I thought that I could draw upon, right? So I just pressed in and learned as much as I could.
Exactly, you got to kind of jump into that moment and get yourself involved in that environment, so you're like, okay, I can do this, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I look at mental health, and from a psychological standpoint, you're kind of looking at, I always want to see, like I got into it with a teacher of mine years ago, and she was talking a lot about depression, and obviously I've never been into like a very depressive state. You get to your lowest, but I haven't been to that capacity.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things I was trying to understand, you know, the brain behind it, like what's going on inside of your head and how you can take it. It's funny. So you can see, obviously, it was the belief system that changed within you.
Yes. Whether
you found God, you found some more of a sense of a community, a belonging,
yes,
that allowed you to persevere. And how did running intertwine with that? It was just an extra push. It was another release, like you had said at the beginning of the interview. It was just that extra thing. Like some people do other things. They play basketball, hockey. For you, what was so good about running that kind of let you free from that mental state?
Well, automatically you have a sense of accomplishment. You're out there, you're doing something worthwhile, right? So that's builds optimism right away. When you're dealing with some not so good thoughts or feelings or emotions, you've got frustration, you've got all these feelings of angst or anxiety going on. When you're running, it's a tremendous release. You gotta release that somehow.
For sure.
You pent that up and, you know, things may not go as well. Clinically speaking, there's a lot of good data supporting what cardiovascular exercise does on the human body and on the brain.
For sure.
You know, you're releasing your serotonins and things like that, and you're feeling better. There's a sense of euphorism. You're feeling more euphoric.
You feel, get the runner's high.
Yep. You're out you're outside running, so sunshine, right?
Exactly.
Trees, whatever.
No, exactly. It's a whole different. You put yourself in that different environment.
Yep.
I actually had a teacher one time. He would tell me he would read, he would walk, and he'd be on the treadmill and he'd be reading. He's like, yeah, it's one of my little tricks that you do that. You get the air inside you. It goes in your head. You retain. You have a higher retention level, right, of information within you. I think it's super important because, especially in today's world, you can kind of see the suicide rates. A number of things are coming out. So I want you to talk about. So you are raising money for this team Unbreakable.
Yes.
And it's in regards to you're going to be doing it's running counseling. How do you explain this for me? Explain this for me for a minute.
So, Team Unbreakable is an initiative that falls under Cameron Helps. Cameron Helps is a not-for-profit organization that...
I tried to get that right at the beginning, by the way, guys, so I just let it easier for Darren to explain. Sorry.
Yeah, so Cameron Helps is a not-for-profit organization whose mandate is to try to save a person just to prevent suicide one life at a time. So they're raising awareness, they're reducing the stigma that's attached to suicide and mental health. They have run therapy programs like Team Unbreakable.
Yeah.
They have other initiatives that they go into the schools and into the clinics and things like that. So, but Team Unbreakable, what it is, it's a run therapy program based for youth, 12 weeks, twice a week. It could be, generally it's at-risk youth, whether they're diagnosed or undiagnosed. It really doesn't matter, but if they're feeling anxiety, if they're dealing with depression, if they're going through issues like that, you bring them out to the therapy clinics. Every night there's like a component, like an education component, where you're either talking about nutrition, you're talking about running techniques, you're talking about sleep, you're talking about self-awareness, you're talking about managing your moods and things like that. So there's an educational component, and then you bring them out for a run that night. Before they run, they'll write down on a journal how they're feeling, and on a scale of 1 to 10, they'll evaluate themselves. So 1 being feeling not so low, 10 they're feeling quite happy.
Yeah.
They'll identify how they're feeling before the run, then they go and do a run, whatever the distance is that night, and then they'll self-evaluate at the end of the night and record their number. Over 12 weeks, I would imagine that they're going to see an increase in their moods. Their moods will elevate, and they'll see it. I'm sure there'll be a pattern before they run and after they run.
For sure.
Moods might be here. At the end of the run, the moods probably will be there. That's the whole point of it, right?
The whole gist behind it.
Yeah. In order for somebody to really start tackling their mental health, if they're dealing with depression or anxiety, social anxiety is such a widespread thing amongst young people today, they need to really learn how to self-evaluate.
For sure.
They need to know how they're feeling. They need to develop those skills, those self-awareness skills.
I think that's huge, Darren, honestly, because that's one of the things I've found in our society alone, because we're exposed to so much information, so many things are kind of getting shoved down our throat.
Oh, bombarded. Yeah.
I think a lot of people lack self-awareness. It's one of those things, they don't truly have a self-awareness because we have so much noise. You have literally, you're working on a project, you have your phone here, you have the computer here, your music's blaring in your ears. There's no way that people are actually building this foundation, and we almost have a society of millennials, and I don't say this controversially, that's almost lost in a sense, because they were sold the belief that we have to go down this road, you get your degree, you go get your job, this is that, and then all of a sudden when the expectation doesn't meet reality, we're sitting back in our seats saying, what just happened? And I think that's what's happening. So what I want to talk about, because you're the first person I've been able to get on here and talk about depression and a number of these the whole mental side of a number of things. Where do you think this stems from, Darren? That's what I really want to ask. Like, where does the depression stem from, and the reason it's going up? Like, where do you think? And if you don't mind me asking that, I'm just curious.
No, I'm okay. It's a pretty tough question to answer because I'm sure it's so multifaceted. There are so many inputs that would cause depression. But particularly if we're just focusing on today's younger generation, I would say the stress level, the stressors that our younger generation deals with is beyond what I experienced as a young fellow. The level of instability in the world, whether it's economic, whether it's political, whether it's the family structure being redefined, things like bullying in school, the very fact through Facebook, social media, things like that, the world is such a smaller thing.
So true.
Right? And you can no longer feel like you can hide. So on the one hand, it's a good thing. It brings about
Community,
more
almost.
community. Yeah.
Brings people together.
But you're exposed. When you're on social media, what you're presenting, everybody sees.
It's so true.
That I would tend to think, whether our young folks realize it or not, just puts a degree of tension, anxiety in them.
No, absolutely.
Without them even realizing, I think.
Yeah, no, exactly. It just kind of creates that stress already that you're like, I have to perceive this image of society. It's almost as if within the social media era, we're all marketers. You're selling yourself in a certain way that this is the way I'm perceived as, and almost in a sense, if it kind of corresponds with depression, that people don't really see the back end. It's like, I'm posting photos, I'm on a vacation, everything looks all sunshine and rainbows. But then in reality, you're inside your head, and that's where no one kind of gets to see that image unless you talk about it. So
in that process, they're losing their a sense of authenticity.
Yeah.
They're no longer being real.
No,
right?
exactly.
And if you're on social media, you're not going to present all your negative stuff and all the bad sides of you, right? You're going to portray the best looking picture of yourself that you can.
Exactly.
So there's a certain facade that requires quite a bit of energy and work to uphold.
So true.
You're really not being true to yourself. And I think when you're not true to yourself, you're feeling you're not authentic. If you're not authentic, you feel like you're kind of even cheating yourself, lying to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that could, for some, lead to things like depression.
Lead to something down the path. Like,
Yeah.
You even take somebody, a good example, and when I was at a Tony Robbins seminar, you take somebody like Robin Williams. He spent his whole life making everybody else laugh and happy, and at the end of the day, he wasn't happy.
Right.
And then leads to an inevitable situation. So I want to talk about how important it is to have something like your mentoring program, where the counseling, but you're mentoring people. How important it is to have that support so that we don't lose some of these lives.
Well, just from a statistical base, the number of young people that deal with depression and social anxiety or other mental health illnesses or issues is 4 out of 5. It's crazy. It's absolutely absurd. So if you're not providing something for these young people, they're basically left on their own.
No, 100%.
And so you need to meet them somewhere. You need to go where they go. So the Run Therapy programs are targeting high schools. They're targeting the hospitals. So for those that are at risk already.
Definitely.
Team Unbreakable is going into there. We're going into health practitioners like physiotherapists, chiropractors, whatever. Wherever we can put them in, that's where we're trying to get them.
I think that's awesome. That was what I wanted to ask you from a marketing standpoint. Like, how are you guys marketing to build it? Like, how are you building the awareness? So you're going into these schools and you'll go do a presentation and talk about this is the problem, here's the solution, kind of getting them involved, active in the community. One of my things, I guess, my philosophy in life, just so we can kind of relate a little bit in this context, was I would always say when somebody's down, one of the best things you can ever do is try to bring them up. That gives you that sense of fulfillment, right? And a lot of people, I think, we're living in a society which is very individualistic, and it's like that. It's made for design that we got to be competing against each other, and we're kind of losing that sense of belonging. That aspect of community is kind of separating in society. You see,
right?
So would you argue that's partial or part of the reason why the depression rate's going up? Absolutely. Because everybody's going in their own head now.
Absolutely. So how do you combat that? So what you're talking about is being very self-focused, right? It's very much about us as an individual. You just do exactly the opposite. You help them to become more others-focused.
Exactly.
And so these Run Therapy programs, we have to draw on volunteers as coaches and mentors and things like that. So the other thing is you bring some of these young people through the program, and then you try to get them back in as coaches, right? So they've come in and they've benefited on their own. Now let's get them to start thinking about the next person, and they can take their experience and expertise that they've gained and go and help the next person.
I think that's awesome. I think that's a great way too, because they get the experience and then they go into the actual environment and showing people the techniques and things that they used.
Right.
I want you to walk me through this. I like going a little bit inside the mental aspect of it.
Okay.
If you're dealing with, let's say, somebody you're counseling or you're mentoring, and they're hitting a breakthrough in a bad way. They're going through in their head. They're like, "That's it. I can't do it. I want to quit. This is it. I'm not feeling good." What are some of the things you deal with these people to kind of get them out of that state? Because I find that's what a lot of it is trying to break through the noise of the mind and get you into that other state, get you out of that depressive state. Obviously, it's involved. Your whole body language gets involved. You're kind of down in the dumps. Like, how do you get out of that state is what I want to know, because it's so important. And obviously, for some, it's different. But what are some of these things, whether, like, obviously with the running, but you're dealing with someone that says, like, I can't do it. Like, that's it. I give up. I don't want to run. I just feel like crap. I'm sick of this. I just want to shut off. How would you deal with that? I know it's a dark, deep question.
So you pay attention. In other words, spend some time, read them, and ask them very direct questions. So if you're noticing mood changes, if you're noticing, you listen to their language, the vernacular that they're using. If they're talking about self-harm, or if they're talking about losing interest in school, and you're seeing some behavioral pattern changes.
That's what I was going to ask. It's the patterns, right?
Yeah. So if you know them over a period of time, so then you can watch those patterns, and if you're recognizing some of these patterns that you're getting concerned, then you ask them very outright. So the general question is, how are you doing?
Exactly.
And of course they're going to turn around and say, "Oh, I'm fine." No, really, how are you doing? And you engage them, you look them square in the eye, and you just let them know that, no, this is okay. It's okay to talk about this, and reassure them, validate them, and you can even say something like, "You know what, if you're not feeling so positive, that's all right."
Exactly, yeah.
And I'm quite okay. Why don't you just tell me how you're feeling? And so it's a bit of a dance, a delicate dance.
For sure.
Because you want to be respectful, but on the other hand, you want to draw the person out and just let them know that this is a safe place to talk about their feelings, because you want them to engage.
No, 100%.
On an emotional level, right? And then if they start sharing a little bit and they're sharing some things that you're concerned about, then don't be afraid to ask very specific questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I was dealing with somebody who had just told me that, "You know what, I don't think life is that exciting anymore," I'd listen to that, and I would just say, "So are you telling me that you have thoughts of self-harm?" And then you just let them answer, and you show them that you're quite comfortable in asking that question.
For sure.
Because if the young person is having thoughts of self-harm, they want to talk to somebody.
It's so
and
true.
They want to be able to talk to somebody that's not going to freak out or judge or blame or criticize. They want to be able to see somebody on the other side of the conversation feeling quite okay with the subject, and they're not.
Exactly, yeah. You're kind of open to discussing and
Yeah.
saying these are some of the methods and techniques we can utilize so that we can get you out of that state and kind of push you forward.
So it starts with letting them know that it's okay to talk about it, and
Okay.
not only is it okay to talk about it, but it's absolutely necessary to talk about
Definitely.
it. And so once they start talking about it, then you have to assess the level of crisis, if there's a crisis. And if there is, then you go through the channels that are set up. So in our city here, we have 127-seater,
Okay.
Sudbury Mental Health Crisis Center.
Okay.
So there's a phone number that can be called. You can bring them along, whatever. Go with them, or if they have a parent or a loved one that can bring them, you get them into the system. And that's one of the first places that they can go. If the person is a little bit farther down the road in their thoughts and they have done some self-harm, or they have a plan or something, you might want to take a little bit farther.
Exactly, yeah.
And if you did come across somebody that was in the process, well then, you could bring them to emergency and whatever.
And you got to take kind of the right
Yeah.
procedures.
Yeah.
How successful do you think, like how effective is the clinical psychology aspect of it, the ones that are trying to get inside there and trying to figure out where this all started? Do you find it's effective when you sit down, like if you have people sit down with the clinical psychologist or just a psychologist in general? Is it effective, or is it more better off to get more practical and take them out running and just kind of work with them from there? I'm just curious. Like,
so this is just my perspective, and I suppose my wife and I have a degree of perspective that's a little bit untypical than the average person. For the past 10 years, one of our sons has been dealing with what's called concurrent disorders. So severe depression, anxiety, substance use, and suicidal ideation. In the past 10 years, he's had well over a dozen serious self-harm circumstances.
wow.
Been in and out of hospital and whatever. So it's been a real struggle for the young man.
For sure. I can imagine.
So we've encountered psychiatrists, we've encountered counselors, we've encountered a whole lot of resources that the mental health system has in place here in the city. For the most part, it's all quite good.
It is. That's good to
And
hear.
we're extremely grateful that it's there, and we've accessed it probably more times than we like to admit that we have, but it was absolutely necessary.
Absolutely.
Without it, we would have, not sure we'd be here today telling the same story.
Absolutely, yeah.
To be quite frank about it.
No, I believe that. Yeah.
So it definitely has its place. On the other side, you're always trying to encourage somebody who's dealing with mental health issues, you know, things like proper nutrition, proper sleep, proper exercise. Those foundational things right there are very key in their self-management and maintaining a better degree of mental health.
Absolutely.
So again, getting back to running is vital for that.
For sure, yeah, to get those endorphins pumping, get you kind of set up for the day. I make a joke. I don't drink coffee. I run 5K and have a workout.
Okay.
That's my morning coffee is the 5K and a workout because it kind of sets the tone. That's my priming exercise or ritual. Before I ever were to go on a stage or something, I want to work out in the morning because it sets the tone for that day.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people don't want to get into that. They don't want to put the work in to get control of their state. Like, not that they don't want to put the work in, but I mean, they don't want to. You got to do the right things so that you can kind of keep yourself on a good pattern, right?
Right.
Which makes it a lot more consistent. A lot of people I see, especially in our generation, with all the lack of focus and the noise coming through, it's hard to kind of keep control of your state because you're being pulled in 40 different directions.
Right. So that brings up a point about when we were talking about the younger generation earlier, their stressors and their lifestyle right now. As I come from a different generation, so I'm not as excited about video games and things like that. It has its place, but when I see a young person spending hours sitting down instead of being out there running, as an example, I have a different opinion about that one.
I want to give them a little bit of a boot in the behind and say, get outside, right?
In a very gentle, kind way. If we can encourage them to get off the couch and stop, just
for sure
watching Netflix or watching movies, playing video games, and let's get out there and do things like running. Let's exercise. Let's do something. Makes a world of difference for them.
100%.
Now, for somebody who is dealing with depression or some other kind of mental health issue, it's a tough go for them. And so that requires a tremendous amount of patience for somebody like me to come alongside of them to encourage them to do just that. There should be no judgment, no shame, no blame, right, from my end. Mm-hmm. I have to be as empathetic and understanding as I can to encourage them to do that without making them feel less than or
no, exactly,
whatever.
Yeah.
Because then you're just going to continue just to build the negative thoughts in their head, and that's what you're trying to do, just the opposite.
Exactly, yeah.
You're trying to encourage them to feel better and
a lot of the time too,
different thoughts.
A lot of time is medication a big thing that they have to push too. If you can't get them out of there, is that sometimes almost not redundant, but is it not a solution that it only is a temporary solution? Like, we have to get deeper inside their mind first, or sometimes obviously medication would be the way to go as well, or
yeah, again,
it's a flux, right?
I can only speak from my experience, so I'm not a trained counselor. I'm not
for sure.
a medical practitioner or anything like that. I'll speak in my son's life. It definitely had its place. For the last year or so, he's been off all medications. And he's got the approval of his psychiatrist while he's doing that. And my wife and I, because we walk so closely with him as coach and companion in his quest to overcome all of this,
definitely,
he uses us as a sounding board, and we just kind of help him with perspective. And so we wholeheartedly support his approach. The interesting thing is, without those mood stabilizers and the hormonal balances, it just makes the task more onerous and difficult for him to self-manage.
For sure.
And one of his motivations for not being on antidepressants as one of the medications that he came off of was just so he can feel again.
Wow, yeah.
One of the realities of being on antidepressants is it just kind of flatlines your emotions. So on the positive side of that, you're not feeling the sharpness of the sting and the impact of the negative thoughts, right? Because it kind of
mellows you out.
Yeah. Dulls it down. But on the opposite side of that, you also don't have, see a blue sky and the sun in the sky. He can see it, but he wouldn't experience it on an emotional level.
That makes sense.
Taste of food. He can have a wonderful meal and not enjoy the taste of it as much. So those are just some really simple examples.
Shuts off a little bit of your receptors in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I was asking, because I figure this is a topic, like I said, I haven't been able to really talk to anybody about, and I really wanted to get into it. And this is just a question, and not to be taken the wrong way. Have you ever thought, do you think maybe sometimes if they had a life coach would maybe be another option or solution? I have my own actually on this one side. His name's Dr. David White. And super cool guy, and he's one of those guys that you can be in a really bad state, and you give him a call, and he'll be on the line, and all of a sudden you're off the call, you're smiling. He's kind of very forward, but he's great at what he does. Is that, you ever think, maybe another option for certain things people can take?
I think it's imperative.
Yeah.
Accountability, right?
It's huge.
To have accountability in their lives. So I've always had either a mentor or accountability friends or coaches, and I would go run after them.
Exactly, yeah.
Like I would go and find, and I keep 2 or 3 of them in my life to speak into my life. I give them full permission to, if I'm being a bit of an arse or something like that, it's like, Darren, this is uncharacteristic of you. You know, what are you doing? Like, what are you thinking? They can come in and speak and just kind of help shape and influence.
Exactly.
So for somebody dealing with mental health issues, I think it's an imperative thing
For
to
sure.
have.
You get some, like, you ever watch anything by Tony Robbins? I'm just curious. I know
Yes.
some people have a little
Past,
bit,
yep.
they're opposite with him. Some people like him, some don't. But I find this guy's got a presence on him. And it seems, I almost
Well,
believe
he's been around for how long too?
30 years. And
So that's got to say something.
it does, really.
Yeah.
And he follows neurolinguistic programming and a number of other things, but he is very successful at what he does. I almost believe, personally, because I've watched so much of his stuff, you'd think that he'd be able to take anybody for that time being and kind of change them a little bit. It almost seems, he said in his last 30 years, he's never lost a single life. He's the one that gets the phone call when someone calls and said, that's it, we're I'm going to pull the plug or whatever it is.
Wow.
And he said in his last 30 years, he's never lost a single person. He's had people come to his door after his seminars, and the person's just, ready to do the exact same thing, and he's able to walk them through it, do his counseling, and it works. So he's
That's
someone I
quite
look up to.
remarkable, isn't that?
It really is.
Wow.
I know a lot of people have, because he swears on stage and he does all these things, but it seems almost as if, and if you watch a documentary, for people out there that are watching this, I'm not your guru. It's interesting. He's a very abrasive, straightforward guy, but it shows the way his seminars break through the Date with Destiny, where he's changing people and he's impacting, and he's someone I look up to myself, and that's why I want to ask, because he kind of is in the other side of mental health. He's not coming from a clinical spot.
Right.
He went in the back door, and he's done very well. So to close this interview off, though, I want to ask you, so where can we donate? If we're looking to donate for your run, I'm going to do a donation for you as well. So it's the Scotia Waterfront Toronto Marathon, October 22nd. So where can we donate for you to get some money going to this campaign and build awareness for this?
So Google Cameron Helps.
Okay.
Courageous Hope. My personal marathon is called Courageous Hope Marathon. So if you Google Cameron Helps, Courageous Hope, you'll find my link. You'll see my smiling picture on my fundraising page, and there's a place on that page for providing a donation. And all funds that we're raising here for Team Unbreakable stay in the city.
Wow, I like that.
That's exciting.
It's a community-oriented thing.
It is.
It's funny. Darren says it's his first marathon. I would take it like you've done a few. It looks like you did a few before.
No, I haven't. I've done a half marathon back in 2005. But
Okay.
haven't since.
And a marathon's how many kilometers? A marathon?
42.2.
42.2.
That's a lot.
You're going to be crawling by the end of that. I should run it next year. I should sign up and be like, this is it. We'll go together.
I think that'd be cool.
That would be good. I should. If I have the time, I actually should do that. Other than that, so what's the last thing I want to say is, what can we expect from you, Darren, after this marathon? You're just going to keep building awareness, building the counseling program you guys are bringing to Sudbury. Is there anything else we can expect from you?
Absolutely. So I'm going to stay in touch with Team Unbreakable. My daughter and myself are going to become coaches.
Nice.
And volunteers, and we'll keep supporting Cameron Helps. I'll probably keep fundraising on their behalf if I can.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that Josh Tilson has kind of inspired me to do, other than running this marathon and supporting Team Unbreakable, is just listening to that young man courageously tell the story publicly has just forced me, or not forced me, but inspired me to re-engage myself on a public level. So I'm putting talks together.
Wow.
And I'm going to make myself available either through Cameron Helps or other organizations, just to go out and sit with people either on a one-on-one basis or for parents who have gone through
Definitely.
or are going through circumstances. Or venues that Cameron Helps or organizations like them will set up for me that I can speak on behalf of those dealing with what we're talking about.
I think that's it'll be super impactful too, Darren.
Yep,
I think
I
we
think so.
need people like that to go out in the city and do that. Any way I can help, I'm your guy.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's honestly been an absolute pleasure to have Darren on here. I tagged him in here, guys, on your thread for Facebook, so you guys will see it. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, my
Thanks
friend.
for the time.